the APS SIAD Interest Group, otherwise known as AusPlat. We appreciate you coming along on this fine Wednesday night. I also want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and waterways of which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge that these lands and waterways have always been places of cultural, spiritual and educational significance. So thank you all for coming tonight. Janie and Amanda have been keeping us apprised of this project for some time through AusPlat conferences, and everyone has been really keen to hear about the finished product. And if you were in Hobart in September last year, you would have heard some of what they're probably going to talk about tonight. But it's an absolute pleasure to have the two of them speaking tonight to everyone. They're great speakers as well, and they're very enthusiastic. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them, and they can introduce themselves and tell you about their wonderful project. So thank you, Janie and Amanda.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and the rest of the gang. We so appreciate having this opportunity to talk to everyone and having this platform. But we've also really appreciated the support and enthusiasm that everyone in the community has had for this project. That's really, you know what it's like with some of these long projects. You need that enthusiasm to keep you going. You need the other people around you saying, yes, this is something we need. This is something we need to know about. So we've just loved that. So we've got both the University of Canberra and ANU symbols on the front of our report because that is what we'll be talking about tonight. But Amanda and I, in case you don't know, are both from the University of Canberra. Tanya's already done a wonderful acknowledgement of country. I'd like to just extend that and say that by taking part in this kind of sharing of knowledge and debate that's happening today, we recognise that we on Ngunnawal country are continuing a long tradition of knowledge sharing and discussion.
Thank you, Janie, and thanks everyone. Really excited to see you here this evening. We're going to put it over to you first up, because when we were thinking about the need for this project, Janie and I spoke with lots of different groups of people. Even before we got to do any form of analysis, we talked to current students, employers, potential employers, people like us in the room here this evening, tertiary educators. And we really felt that there was a need to identify specific jobs for 3-year psychology graduates. And we're just curious, please let us know in the chat or feel free to pop up your hand and jump on the microphone. But looking at the screen, which of these issues that we identified early on resonates with you the most? I know that can be tricky where we're asking you to pick one of these 8, or potentially it's one that we actually have missed and that we would love to hear about. But we know the need to help prospective students who are coming along, often with their families, to open day, who want the information about why should I do a psychology degree? How do we help our current students, not only at the end of their degree in terms of identifying a particular job, a worthwhile job where they can apply their skills and their knowledge from their degree, but how we can support them through their course progression to understand the skills and attributes and realise their importance, they're required. Increasingly so, we have industry placement or work integrated learning embedded in our undergraduate courses here in Australia. How come we realised there was a need to identify potential industry placements, perhaps beyond those we might typically associate? What can we all do to support our students' career planning? And how might that inform course design? So just thinking of, and probably that last one we'd like to touch upon later this evening, but thinking about, can these findings that we'll present tonight, and can the question of, what can a 3-year psychology graduate do? Not where they go already, but what can they do? Can those findings and the discussion help us to challenge potential misconception that we often talk about in general society and often within universities themselves around what psychology is and isn't? So if you haven't already, let us know in the chat.
Any of those
or as it's bolded down the bottom, any we have missed.
Yeah. So
What do you think?
what should we be focusing on and talking about tonight when we get to this? So Tony's talking about the bottlenecks from that undergraduate to fourth year and why that's really how we might be able to address that, whether that not just be through kind of I don't know about you, Tony, but it can be not just about addressing the bottleneck, but the reason why so many people want to go through that particular bottleneck, which I think there's subtleties there, isn't there? We've got a lot of people saying number 2, really helping current students.
Yeah, and I guess that aligns with number 4, thinking about that endpoint in psychology graduates. As educators of undergraduate psychology, we know we have to prepare students also for postgraduate psychological training, and we need to meet the APAC competencies and achievement of course learning outcomes. But increasingly so, we think certainly, and I'm assuming everyone here this evening feels similarly, but please let us know if not, that we need to support those students who don't want to go on to further study. And that is completely fine, because we know that there's a wonderful breadth and depth of opportunities available to them.
So, I like Alyssa and Alyssa are both saying, oh, well, quite a few people saying all of the above.
Okay. All of the above, that's helpful. And particularly, I mean, it makes sense that we're particularly focused on current students with our group this evening.
Yeah.
So it looks like we've done pretty well, because it looks like we haven't necessarily missed any. But if anything comes up and you're thinking about a different group as we progress this evening, please let us know. What are we doing this evening? Well, we are going to speak with you a little bit about why we need to consider workforce demand for psychology graduates. We are going to do a little bit of background, but don't worry, that's going to be quite minimal. We want this to be discussion based, but you might not know who we are. You might not know what we're talking about with this post-act psychology. So we're going to give you a bit of information about the report that we produced, which, as Janie alluded to earlier this evening, it was many years in the making, and we're really thrilled to be at this point. But really focusing on that last point, what now? We've got our report, we've got some findings. We think we know, we have some good ideas, we think, a bit biased, but we think we've got some good ideas of how we can implement that as tertiary educators, but also for other areas. But let's discuss that and address the questions that come through as well.
I'm really excited by what Alyssa's saying about using it with parents and school teachers and counsellors. It's awesome to know it's being used for a start, but that's not actually a group. So we've done a few things we'll talk about at the end, but perhaps we'll call on you, Alyssa, to tell us about that experience and how it went.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really interesting.
Absolutely. So in sum, if we had to summarise the problem or problems, we know there is often a common misconception about psychology, even as a discipline, let alone what skills and attributes a psychology graduate can have, or even a psychology student when we're looking at those work integrated learning opportunities. And we know, as we have authors in the room here this evening have earlier identified as well, that there has been a historical focus that I think is shifting for the better on training to become psychologists. Now, we also identified that when you're thinking about what can a 3-year psychology graduate do, or if someone comes up to you at open day and they've got their family and they're asking, what job can my child do at the end of these 3 years? When we spoke to tertiary educators, and please let us know if you've got some specific jobs that you would guide them to, let us know in the chat. But typically what we heard was responses like you could work in marketing, you could work in justice, you could work in healthcare settings, you could work in social research. These very broad industries that we typically promote, and rightly so. But what about those specific job roles? There was such a gap. What also, that second last point, which is exciting, I think, what about the jobs that 3-year graduates can do, but we haven't necessarily identified? And that's very different from if we track alumni. And I know there's some issues with the current tracking of alumni, but we track where they go. We don't necessarily look where they can go but aren't going. So that really led us to consider, are there actually even entire industries that might be missing from when we're promoting and facilitating work ready preparedness for our students.
And I'd just add in there too, we know that the workforce is shifting. We know technology is changing things, so we really do need to be forward looking with this. You know, the whole they're going to be applying for jobs that haven't been invented yet.
Yes.
And we've got to apply that to these students as well, instead of just putting it in the too hard basket or handballing it to careers, although we should be working with careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're thinking about these issues, and we do have some proposed solutions, don't worry, but we know that the lack of knowledge impacts a lot of different groups. We've talked about prospective students, current students, when they then become graduates, you know, where are we assisting them at that point? What's our responsibility? Current employers and potential employers, all of us as tertiary educators, and then the potential implications to shift that conception of psychology in the general public. So just a small feat there, not a problem. We'll solve that for everyone this evening.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'm just going to really do a quick summary of our project and the findings. The report is there. If I skim over anything that you want to know more about, you can refer to the project, or obviously we're always happy to talk about it and talk about it at the end. So basically we came with all these questions and we were really helped by the availability of very large data sets. It's only been recently we've actually been able to have large data sets that we can identify patterns in them through the use of machine learning and natural language processing. And luckily for us, job ads are actually a really neat window into the workforce, because what they are is a wish list from employers of a list of attributes they want their new hire to have. So it really is a great way of explicitly understanding what it is they need. Now, they're not perfect. Anyone who's ever read a job ad knows that they're not perfect. But in a large data set, it actually provided a really valuable opportunity for us to be able to analyze them en masse. And like it says, do this future-facing evaluation. What do they want next? Who could they employ? And luckily for us, there was an ANU team that had previously run a very similar project looking at finding jobs for PhD graduates, where they have a similar issue where an individual label is not useful for finding a job. And that we were really trying to get away from use of psychology as a keyword, but instead looking at attributes. So we wanted to map demand for psychology graduate skills and attributes across the workforce and in particular industries. We wanted to identify new job roles that might not have previously been identified, particularly for 3-year graduates without additional qualifications. And we wanted to get more data and insights into those patterns, and then also look at what jobs are associated, job roles, occupations are associated with those skills, so we can really make recommendations for students about other fields they might like to move into. We talked to a lot of educators throughout this, and a lot of people were saying, well, often our students are doing double degrees, or they're looking to do double degrees, or they're looking to see what they can tag psychology onto or do a postgraduate degree in. In terms of methods, yes, this does summarize kind of neatly what we did. I wrote
it looks a bit more linear than
it does. I didn't feel linear at the time. So we start off with a lot of feasibility discussions with all different users. So that was current students, graduates, course designers, career development specialists, employers. We really talked to lots of people, including some of the people here today. So thank you for that. We then sat down with an expert group that included Professor Jackie Cranny and actually developed a schema. A schema was a list of skills and attributes that our graduates come out with from a 3-year degree, and that we could use to identify jobs that were suitable for them. Now, the tricky thing here is a lot of the graduate attributes we know about, like communication, actually don't help identify jobs for psych graduates versus people who have an arts degree or a science degree. So we actually ended up pulling out some of those things that you might naturally think our grads are good at, because they actually just didn't provide that differentiation skill.
Yeah, and that highlights the challenge when you're looking at job advertisements. I've got a second career in my future, I think, in writing job advertisements, having coded thousands of them. But you know, we had some robust discussions because communication skills, I think many of us would argue, are so central to a psychology graduate. Oral, written communication, writing for a variety of audiences. But when you apply that within analysis of job advertisements, it's really hard to actually find a job ad that does not ask for communication.
So it just didn't have that discrimination ability.
Exactly.
So then we sat down and went through a whole process and reprocess of essentially annotating jobs, reading job ads and deciding whether they were suitable or not and to what degree they were suitable. And from there, once we'd really gone through a lot of rigorous evaluation and discussion in those, we passed that to our machine learning team, and we worked with them iteratively to develop a machine learning model that could read a corpus of job ads and accurately break them into those different categories of suitability that we did, so that we identified as appropriate. So once we got that model to 82% accuracy, we then kind of signed off on the model, and then we applied that model to a corpus of 5.1 million job ads.
Oh, only 5.1 million?
Yeah.
Oh, we
We
really
didn't
should go back and
find
do
that many
5.2. 5.1, everyone.
So the job ads were between 2019 and 2022 because we conducted this last year in 2023. And there are about 1 million jobs a year, with the most being in 2022. Lightcast was our partner, so they're our industry partner that we signed a research agreement with to provide that data for us. If anyone's looking to see how to do that kind of thing, happy to chat about it later. But what the schema did is essentially categorize each of those jobs into 4 categories, either not relevant or one of 3 degrees of relevance. So just starting down the bottom, the directly relevant jobs were essentially those we found that perfectly matched the psych degree, and they generally use psychology in the title. And they were directly aligned with graduate attribute skills. And really, these weren't that interesting to us because these were the ones that psychology students and staff can generally pretty easily identify anyway, using a psychology keyword. But the other 2 relevance categories were really interesting. So highly relevant ones were where the skills listed for that job were really largely aligned, not entirely, but largely aligned with the schema that we'd come up with. And then there were potentially relevant. So these are jobs that had fewer alignments, but still many, many skills within them that aligned with a psychology degree.
What did we find, Janie?
It's so useful to have around. Carry my own audience member with me. So what you can see here is that every year around 1% of jobs were coded by the schema as directly relevant by the model. And another 2%, 2.2% usually, were coded as highly relevant, and then a further 20% were potentially relevant. So what we're really saying is we think that instead of students essentially being able to find that 1% or maybe that 3%, opening their eyes to these potentially relevant jobs as well. And really, it really also says a lot about what the psychology degree can contribute to society. If a quarter of the jobs out there actually call for a lot of the skills that we teach, that says something pretty important about what it is we do and what our students can actually contribute. So I'll just run through. There are heaps of data that came out of this. It was hard to narrow down to what to present in the report and today. But these are a couple of the key takeaways. So first of all, we looked at the broad industry categories, and the column on the left is those that have the highest proportion of psychology relevant jobs. And many of these are the ones that you would expect. Legal, social and welfare professionals, health and welfare, personal service workers, education. There's a lot of roles in education that directly call for psychology attributes and so forth. So that was our understanding. But then what we did, and this is the column on the right-hand side, is look at the top industries numerically for relevant job ads. So these are industries, and you can see many of them are the same as the list on the right, but some of them, like design, engineering, science and transport professionals, engineering, ICT and science technicians, and ICT professionals, these are huge industries. So even if you're talking about a situation where only 1% of jobs in those industries are relevant to psych grads, we're still talking numerically about a very large number of jobs available.
Yep.
And so these are the kind of industries we should be thinking about, really reaching out to and working with, because there are lots of jobs associated there that just aren't high in visibility and priority for us.
So even at this point, you know, previously I spoke of how we typically recommend certain industry areas to students. Even at this point, we were thinking, oh, we've got some new things here at that broad level. But we know you want more, as did we, to get down to the specificity of specific jobs.
Yeah. So going one step lower, these still aren't specific jobs, but they're job categories.
Yeah.
And this will just give you an idea of how these kinds of jobs kind of line up. So the kinds of ones that were in the directly relevant column were things like we'd expect: psychologists, counselors, social workers, community workers, and so forth. We also had jobs in there appearing, the nurses are there because we have mental health nurses, where a lot of the skills listed line up. We were really surprised, but occupational therapy aligns very, very closely with the psychology graduate attributes. And we can talk a bit more about that later. The highly relevant things we got things like human resource that you'd expect, and a lot of other roles like this, intelligence and policy analysts, particularly relevant to us here in Canberra, and a role of other information officers and things like that. In the potentially relevant, and these are the ones we need to think about a bit differently, is thinking about that the skills they call for in teachers, in a lot of managers, in things like medical technicians, a lot of those are calling for, and we're still talking about categories of jobs, so only some jobs within this category call for it, but a lot of skills that are appropriate.
Yes, we're not yet at the level of job title.
We'll get there. So what I think most of us want to know, and what we really want to focus on is, well, that's all well and good, but what can 3-year grads do? Yes, without getting further qualifications. So what we did is create an additional rating system. And what this did is essentially flag those jobs that needed further qualifications so we could kind of pair them out. This was really difficult.
Yes.
If you go and read a job ad, sometimes it is almost impossible to tell. Many ads are now what they call degree agnostic. So they say something like, they don't ask for a degree. They say any relevant degree. And it should be really promising. It made our job harder, but it's also quite hard for students. Students are looking for the tagline that says they can apply for it. So it also helped us understand how difficult it is for graduates out there in the workforce. Some ads don't ask for a particular degree, but imply one in the title. Some, they prefer a specific degree, but if you read down the bottom, they say, or similar degree with experience, or willing to apply for some kind of postgraduate study. So they're actually happy to take people with just those attributes. Specific jobs with the same title can differ in requirements. And we saw this a lot for social work. At no point are we saying that our students have the qualifications to be a social worker per se, but some jobs that were called social worker actually said, we'll accept psychology graduate with caseworker experience or some other experience as well. So it's not as simple as the title necessarily dictating.
We had to really go through thousands of job ads with a fine-tooth comb. As I said, there's another career there for us in writing some job advertisements to assist.
So the other two things going into this, it's really important, and I think important to communicate to students as well. Individual psych grads also held their own interests and attainments. You talk to some students who also have, some kind of qualification in photography or qualification in IT or whatever else it is that they're interested in, have a qualification in, and that has to fit in here as well. So not every job will suit every graduate, which I think is what what our students want, right? They want a big list of jobs they can all go and apply for. But what we're presenting is a list of jobs they can potentially apply for. They've got to work out what works for them. So
here we are. I feel like that needed a drum roll. Here we are. We've got job categories, but the job titles.
Specific job titles. Now, these are not all of them, of course. These are just the most common ones that came up repeatedly. But these are the kind of job titles that came up that have, some of them have potential for 3-year psych grads.
Yep.
So we've got all kinds of things in there. We've got UX designer, which is user experience designer, or software tester and app tester. Those are obviously within that category of software and applications programmers. That is not a category of jobs our students would normally look in. But when you look at what they require, some of those jobs are looking for things like the ability to run research projects, the ability to understand human behavior, the ability to change human behavior. And they'll ask that within these different environments, sometimes environments we don't think of it at all. So we spent a lot of time Googling a lot of these terms, like diversional therapists, that we didn't know what they were.
Yes.
And I think the students don't necessarily have the confidence to go and do that. So perhaps by providing this list, we can say, hey, go and have a look at these jobs. Do they suit you? Is this something that would match up? I mean, something like a private investigator, when you look at the skills that they want, often they line up really, really well with a psychology graduate. Some people hire them straight out, others will ask for a postgraduate degree or what is it? It's like a specialist training in things like that. And, some kind of these security consultants and things like that. We've got lots of security vulnerability researchers, lots of engagement, public relations and things like this. Sometimes they're looking for just a pure public relations person. Sometimes they're looking for someone to go out, communicate research, engage with people, do that element of policy translation and things like this as well.
And as Janie said, this is not an exhaustive list. It's not like, here are the job titles, off you go. There's much more detail within our report that's publicly available. And interesting, I can see your comment there, Tanya, particularly surprised or excited by policy analysts. And I think that highlights the necessity to consider where our universities are placed, because we weren't excited at all by that one. Being located in Canberra, we have you might not have known this, a high public servant, a number of employees in the territory. And a lot of our students we know who come and study psychology with us are already working in policy areas, or they definitely go through to graduate programs and really work on that policy. And I think that's fantastic, because what do we really want from that? We need a good understanding of research, good understanding of evidence base, ability to communicate succinctly and clearly.
But could we be doing some more authentic assessment around that?
Could we?
Could we?
I think we could. Anyone else have any thoughts regarding those particular job titles? I mean, I find this to be the most exciting slide myself. And Janie and I are not career specialists. We are researchers. And we have, I didn't know what a UX designer was, but it kept coming up, and we've had to have a look at those.
So, environment sustainability did come up in a lot of different ways. There was also a lot of, that was almost with some of the health promotion as well, in a similar kind of space. Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, it's
Are we allowed to ask questions? Oh, sorry.
Sure, please go ahead.
So I saw that you wrote we can ask questions, but they want a writing on.
Go right ahead.
Go right ahead.
Or I can say it here. So are these jobs all, I assume they're open to other things in addition to psychology graduates, right?
Absolutely. So these are the results of applying that annotation schema. And as Janie pointed out, we were particularly interested in those jobs that don't require additional qualifications, because we know if a student goes to type in psychology, what comes out 9 times out of 10 is a psychologist, which that is what we're avoiding with the purposes of this project, to try and find suitable jobs for 3-year psychology graduates. So it wasn't necessarily that it came up saying that they need a psychology degree, or often people will use behavioral sciences in the translation into a job ad, or relevant social sciences. There's so many different terms that are used. It's through the application of our schema and going through those jobs to look at the skills and attributes and then apply that through the machine learning process that we've been able to identify these jobs.
And often they wouldn't have anyone with a psych degree working in them currently. I mean, things like, and I know I use this example at AusPlat because it was a good one, but the warehouse manager. When this came up, we were like,
Mhm.
are you serious? What would a
Mhm.
warehouse manager possibly have to do with psych degree?
Yep.
But when you break it down, actually there's a whole heap
Yeah,
they need to know.
not only that, we got so excited by the warehouse manager. We're like, not only are they suitable, but every warehouse manager must have a psychology degree when you break this down.
But
And knew?
we very much doubt that they're actually employing psych grads routinely for a
Absolutely.
job like that. They'd probably be a gasp,
Well,
but
I assume they're open to all like different kind of field. You'll be very competitive.
if you pitch yourself well.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the conversation about what we need to do next, because I think a lot of people, they don't know about the job. Even if they do see it, do they recognize the alignment? And then can they convey that? And, you know, talking to a lot of people about that, they've really said upskilling employers and the general public on what we can do is really important.
Absolutely.
So
I'm really excited by some comments here in the chat. Tony is saying that we should be including industry experience in the undergrad degree. 100% agree. We have an industry placement in our undergraduate degree where they complete 180 hours, Jenny.
it's a lot.
180 hours in a workplace environment. We know that's increasingly becoming the norm across universities in the country, but we'll certainly discuss that in terms of, well, how might you embed that work integrated learning? Natalie, in regard to your comment, the activity we did at Ausplat, thanks for coming along to that. The job descriptions, yes, we've got exemplar job advertisements that we broke down with people at Ausplat. They're also included in our report, and we've got all the links to this information at the end of the roundtable this evening. But we've also developed some lesson plans and accompanying PowerPoint slides that you might like to utilize for your own units. Particularly, we have one for our orientation unit and one for a final year unit. And we have activities around things like those exemplar job ads. So we hope those will be very useful. Okay. Oh, evaluator, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very, very good.
But we wouldn't, again, students wouldn't normally see the word evaluator and think, gee, I've got a great set of skills for
Yeah,
that.
I studied psychology to become an evaluator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't typically, but maybe that's shifting.
Yeah.
So this is what I call the, so what, or if I can articulate that in better, would be the what now. We're really excited by all these findings, and we can see from the chat at least, and when we asked you about which groups do you think this might resonate with, or issues, that we're hopefully on the right track. We want to be able to utilize these findings to address the needs of all of these groups. Now, how we can do that, and noting there are some limitations, but we'd love to talk about these in turn with you all. So please, we want your input, questions, whether that be on the microphone or in the chat.
Well, I think Natalie got in there ahead of time. She knew what we were going to ask, but Natalie,
Yes.
You've got a capstone program evaluation unit in fourth year.
Nice,
nice. Which is great. So what that means, that's a great idea, Natalie. But what that means is if they see the word evaluator, or if they're in a job ad, or if they see evaluation skills or the ability to demonstrate that, they can do that in a really straightforward way, instead of just saying, hey, I've done a lab report for my stats unit, which, hey, I teach that, so I'm not poking fun at that. But having those things right there that they can call on, where they can demonstrate that capacity, it's really great.
And maybe, maybe we need to consider, okay, that's at a fourth year level. Should we, and can we be doing that at the undergraduate level as well? So when we're thinking about how the findings for identifying specific appropriate jobs that utilize the skills and attributes from a 3-year psychology degree, we want to use these findings to inform course level design. So, for example, does your course have an orientation unit? So a professional orientation unit where students become acquainted with psychology as a discipline. They might consider the various industries. They might look at their own skills and attributes, gaps, what they're going to learn from the degree. And often they have a 5-year career plan, which, so I think that's a big ask for a first year student. But again, it's consistent with that focus on workplace preparedness.
So we've, as well, mainly Amanda's designed a lesson plan specifically for a unit like that, based on our particular our particular findings.
Yes.
And so that's being taught this current semester as part of that unit.
Yep.
And then we also have a similar one for the capstone unit, and they're actually the without forcing from us, the lecturer for that unit has actually listed the report as recommended reading or required reading, I think even for that unit, just to really get them to get in there and read some of these titles and see for themselves, and doing activities around that.
And then we're also thinking about, and I know we've touched upon this several times this evening, but the increasing importance and recognition of industry placements. Now, is your university, for example, do you offer work integrated learning? Is it a requirement for your students? And when you think about, let us know in the chat, please, whether you do have this, if you don't, do you see the need for it? And if you do have a work integrated learning opportunity for your students, what type of industry placements do they go to? Because we certainly see some potential, and Jenny, you can speak a lot more to this, at being intimately involved with the WIL coordination at UC, but we think we can broaden the potential industry placement opportunities. So let us know, please, in the chat. Do you have industry placement? If not, do you think you should? And maybe let us know some of the particularly well-known and common industry placements.
So Nanette says they've got a range. It's elective.
It's elective,
range,
okay.
Yeah. Range of settings, and we've got a range too, but I think we could push it. I think we haven't got any warehouse manager ones in there.
Yeah.
I think we can think a lot more broadly in it. Tegan's got a career portfolio task in third year.
That sounds very similar. Your description sounds very similar to our capstone unit. I don't know if anyone has similar. Similar type
I
of
love that idea
assessment.
of selling it specifically to an employer. That's awesome. Alyssa's, we have a practical
combining that placement with the capstone unit.
Yeah.
And also, you know, sometimes when we're thinking about our course redesign and the redesign of our curriculum, we think, well, hold on, we need a lot more psychology in here. I know when we implemented a professional core, we had to combine two of our specialist psychology units. So we used to teach learning and we used to teach cognitive psychology separately. Now we have a combined unit, learning and cognition. That was a really big shift for us for me, I should say. I found that hard. But now, you know, I do see the value. So it looks like we do have, I guess, a bit of a mixture of whether that workplace opportunity is elective, if it's a requirement, if it's rolled into a capstone or as a standalone. And 150 out, again, optional one. And having those close relationships, as Karina's noting, with external partners. I love that, how the students pitch to solve the problem. That really excites me.
We've tried to do that.
Absolutely.
But it can be really, really difficult. And it's great to hear. I know I've heard at Ausplat, people doing it well. When it works, it's fantastic.
And Jonathan's raised a really good point, I think, in terms of where we place the students. It's dependent on that particular market. And you know, if you're in a regional area, there's going to be more potential constraints regarding the breadth of opportunities across different industries.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I went out and was having conversations with people about this project, I was really interested. Some of the people in smaller communities actually said, I don't have a problem finding jobs or knowing where the jobs are because I know everyone. So that was very much done on almost a one-on-one basis for all their students. The staff were embedded in the community and they really knew everyone and could say, hey, you got any jobs going? And they almost facilitated one-on-one jobs themselves. Most of us don't have that capacity. And then Karina's talking about doing it when students are all over the country, which is just another level of difficulty.
And similarly, as Natalie's pointed out, you know, how do we do this with 300+ students?
Yes.
I know at our university, there's a lot of flexibility regarding when students can do their industry and community placement. It's not something that we in psychology solely convene. So it's a requirement, and they've got flexibility across the various placements. It's not like you're doing this in semester 2 because we've got too much saturation for identifying.
We have to spread them across 4 different
placements.
Semesters.
Yeah, and we really did scaffold to build up to that, starting smaller, and then getting. So maybe it's something that you could consider as an elective and then roll out. But just curious in terms of, we're thinking about this at a course level, also thinking about it in your own units. I think it's a very, as Janie knows, I have quite strong views about what I think is a very overused term that is often not well understood, but authentic assessments, but I will use that term. The importance of authentic assessments with real world applications for our students. And I know I myself can do that better in one of my units, I think. But thinking about from a unit level, even if we're not teaching one of these sort of professionally oriented units, what can we be doing?
And I think this has come out in the chat already. It's inherent in talking about these kind of possibilities. You know, Karina talking about this pitching to solve a problem.
Yeah,
that is an authentic assessment. The
Absolutely.
evaluation assessment that we heard about earlier. So those kinds of assessments tie well into.
absolutely.
I feel nervous now using the term authentic assessment because we're building it up.
But also, it doesn't have to be restricted to those professionally oriented units. It doesn't have to be just in our capstone units, in our work integrated learning units. Think about those specialist units that you teach. So if you're doing a unit like learning and cognition, they might do a behavior modification assignment, various case study, or look at health policy and promotion and the like, utilizing various theoretical models and to inform behavioral change, or as someone pointed out earlier around you know, the environmental sustainability, how we might address
really
those
good.
sorts of behaviors and behavioral change. And I think this does align, map onto quite nicely some of the work around psychological literacy, certainly some of, you know, the work of Jackie Crenny and colleagues in terms of how we really need some specific assessment examples. So that's why we tried to come up with these lesson plans with accompanying PowerPoints that, because we were just trying to think, you know, we can come up with a report and we're excited by the report, but we're all really time poor, which is why we particularly appreciate your time this evening. We know you're motivated to come along and share and learn with each other. But how can you take something that is prepared for you and run with it?
Well, Natalie's got some question here about, could this kind of understanding be embedded in each unit relative to the content of that unit?
Absolutely.
So students come back to it. And I really like that idea of continuity. I think we're all probably trying to get that continuity in our degrees and that linking between subjects. And we all know how hard that is, you know, when you have sessional staff coming in and people moving and all kinds of exciting times we all get every semester. But perhaps if those are created and embedded, then they're passed on from person to person and you don't get that drift.
And just thinking about, you know, what we have got now is some specificity of particular job titles for 3-year psychology graduates. And that is addressing what we think is a key gap to date.
Yeah.
How else, beyond giving you the lesson plans, the suggested PowerPoints, etc., and thinking about these points, how else can we implement, or could we use these findings to support the students? And not just us, I mean, collectively, how you might be able to utilize it.
Would specific assessment design help if we kind of collectively created and shared something like that for a piece of assessment? Or would that be too hard across the different universities? I guess it could be adapted.
Oh yeah, all of it,
Yeah.
you know, adapted to fit for purpose.
Because I do feel like the joke that, you know, I made about having a lab report. We do all pretty much have a lab report, I think, in every degree in the country. There's no reason why we can't have an evaluation type assessment used repeatedly in different degrees, if that is a good way of training people and assessing them in an authentic way.
Have a think about that one as we progress, because of course we absolutely, Tony, absolutely, the Australian Handbook for Careers in Psychological Science, which really articulated the needs, hence why we've cited you in our report several times, I believe, because it's really highlighting the challenge, but giving that support and guidance for students along the way.
Giving that extra support about what to do, some more examples.
Alyssa's got a suggestion about potentially grouping the different sub-disciplines of psychology. Ooh,
that'd be good.
I like that idea.
Yeah, so
that would be interest, not skills and attributes, because we've got that, you know, what common skills and attributes do you have from the 3-year psychology degree, and that can differentiate you from other from people with other qualifications for similar jobs.
I think it could also help in getting other academics on board, because part of the problem is, you know, no one wants to be told do more stuff, change your assessment, change what you're teaching. But if you can link it into, hey, here's an assessment idea, using real world jobs that would use the skills you're teaching, you're familiar with, as a social psych or as a cog psych or as a neuro, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And Alyssa's pointed out, she shared the report with career services. We have done the same.
Yeah.
We've tried to get it in as many career offices as possible, because we really, at this point, you know, we've all got the best of intentions, but we need to partner with some specialists in these areas to give us some more information around these particular careers. And Natalie's saying that your idea for assessment design.
I think you're right. Sometimes it's just those seed ideas, and that's why.
Oh, yes. Karina, sorry. I get too excited by the chat. Go, Janie.
I was just going to say, that's one of the great things about OzPlayers. You come up with a whole bunch of ideas about different things you can do. So, and I think that's what this group tries to do as well.
Yeah. So I got excited by Karina's comment.
Talking to HodSpa.
Because, Janie and I will be talking with HodSpa in May about this. And I think that's particularly important. We can make changes depending on what role you are. You might be a discipline lead, a course convener, a unit convener, contributing to a unit. We can all make the changes, but often we need that support at that discipline lead level and the understanding of why these curriculum changes or even just assessment changes are quite crucial. And also to help with the strategy of how you can implement this. Maybe you would embed it to assist with prospective students and open days and the like.
I think often heads of department, heads of schools do have slightly different KPIs, and they perhaps spend a bit more time justifying how they're producing job-ready graduates. So I think this report can help in a number of ways, at the unit convener level, at the course design level, but then also for people who need to talk to the wider university. I saw Tegan's comment, and Tegan, you're speaking my language. I run a 700 person, 700 plus service taught first year research design unit with medical radiation in it, amongst others, and physio.
16 different disciplines.
16, it's not great. So yes, I get you. It is difficult. I guess the question is, some of this applies to other disciplines more than we think. And I mean that in a couple of ways. I think there is an assumption that, say, nurses always go on to be nurses, physios always go on to be physios. I've been talking to the physios, actually. They have a massive dropout rate at about the 7-year mark after they start work, where they all go looking for other jobs. Not all, obviously, but it's a big problem. And they don't know what they can do. So I do think we perhaps underestimate the applicability of the broad discussion, and talking about skills with those. It does depend who you're with. We're in the Faculty of Health, which I think some other groups are. So there are some commonalities across, but totally see your point. And there may be units that this can't be embedded in.
Well, I think it's also that balancing act, isn't it? Like, I know in Janie's unit, she uses a lot of different case studies across different disciplines to identify various research designs. But there's also nothing wrong, I think, with celebrating and promoting psychology as the discipline that it is for our specialist units. You know, I teach a second year unit in undergrad, personality and individual differences, my absolute favorite unit. What's my point there? Oh yeah, I have a lot of students taking that as an elective, and they might not have done any research methods or statistics and the like. That's fine. I don't assume any of that knowledge, but also don't make any apologies for the specificity of personality and individual difference from a psychological science point of view. So it's a delicate balance, I think.
I just want to talk, well, thanks, Tanya. I appreciate your enthusiasm. I do want to talk to Alyssa's point. So this is the pushback from psych major students when you talk about alternative professional pathways. Now, I am going to talk about a piece of research I've just done with an honours student. And just let me digress for a minute because it's specifically relevant to this. He was actually looking at what predicts students' interest in psychology as a discipline, but also intention to complete the degree, kind of commitment to doing a psychology degree. And he was looking at the predictors of that, and there's a bunch of theories around that he was testing. And he looked at things like self-efficacy, which was supposed to be important. It wasn't, not for our undergrads, our first years, and other things like gender threat and things like this. The one thing that drove students' intention to complete their psych degree was their outcome expectancies, what they thought the degree would enable them to do. And that is actually important for us because we do what you're talking about. In our orientation unit, so the first 6 months of their degree, we sit them down and we say, oh, gee, look, a lot of you probably won't go on to be psychs. And here are all these other fantastic jobs. But what we're actually doing, therefore, is really kind of deflating their outcome expectancies or affecting their outcome expectancies. And then we see these issues with interest, engagement, intention to complete. So the problem is they're coming in with all these outcome expectancies of if I do a 3-year degree, I can be a psychologist. And then when they're finding out that that isn't necessarily true, either at first year or we used to see it at 3rd year when they're finishing and having this surprise, that's when we see this dissatisfaction coming up. And that's where you see, you know, if you Google, you do see a lot of people saying, oh, my psych degree wasn't worth it because I didn't get the thing that I wanted out of it. So there's some understandings there about those outcome expectancies and how we might be able to affect that, which then link into what this means for, you know, the where am I? Sorry, it's late for us. I'm losing my train of thought.
And I'm writing back to Alyssa's great question, which I could actually just speak to now. Perhaps.
Excellent.
Look, I think what I was saying probably articulated it better in my chat draft, Alyssa, but I think the answer is really stay tuned. Bearing in mind, we gave exemplar job titles, but it wasn't necessarily, you know, UX designer, for example, might be considered labeled as something else. We really had to comb through the job advertisements, and we've given some examples. Now, how job titles might change, we really need to engage with career specialists to identify that. But it's that translation of the skills and attributes to what can they then go forth and search in a search engine. And hopefully even by looking at those exemplar job titles, getting a bit of an understanding of it. But there's huge diversity as well in terms of how people write job advertisements. And we'd be like, well, this is the same job when we actually read the description, but they've called it something completely different.
So it's also about upskilling the students and broadening their understanding as a whole, not saying here's a list of jobs.
Absolutely.
So we've tried to articulate that while providing a list of jobs.
Yeah.
Ahmed's just said stats units may open the door for specific kinds of jobs.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
Sorry, you've already done that.
Yeah.
Use the same terminology.
Yeah. We've got good agreement there. Absolutely. Excellent point.
And by the way, totally get the bimodal distribution as well. That's happening a lot.
And it also, you know, this is where like Ahmed's comments important because we've got to take into consideration preferences, interests, past experiences and the like. We should be celebrating the diversity of our psychology students and graduates and where they can go. Speaking of graduates, if we can just shift focus a little bit, thinking about how we might or could implement some of these findings or the implications of these findings to support our graduates. You know, do you track your alumni? Do you have regular engagement and contact with your alumni? You know, Janie and I, since completing this report, for example, we've really promoted some other pathways to students who end at the 3-year degree. Notably, say a Master of Occupational Therapy. That's one.
We used to send them to counselling, our counselling postgrad degree, which we still do. But that was kind of where we stopped. But actually, this report has shown us there's a lot of other. And then talking to OT as well, a lot of psych students find their way there themselves. Yeah. Perhaps if we can make that more direct.
And strengthening our relationships with the other disciplines to help support our students. So if we're working to promote those other courses, so think about, would that apply in your university, for example?
Or even say policy courses.
Yeah, absolutely. Policy management, etc.
Yeah, all that kind of thing.
I might even think about the double degrees that, you know, we have some students who, after completing an orientation unit, they can see some potential gaps already. They go and they might go to CIT to fill in that gap during their tertiary studies. They might pick up a double degree. It again depends on personal interests and aspirations. I think we can all identify the potential need to have stronger linkages, if not already, with career services and specialists in that area. And thinking about the success that we could have with industry placements and really highlighting and coming up with some case studies of, you know, some of those atypical industry placements and success within those. I don't know if this applies to you in your own university settings, but we know from talking with lots of educators around the challenge with tracking and supporting alumni. And I think there's a combination of reasons for that. Largely, we're focused on meeting the needs of our current students with increasingly large numbers and the like. But yeah, how else do you think we might be able to implement these findings to support graduates?
Well, Karina talking about a new double degree in nutrition and psychology. We've been talking about that overlap because we get a lot of nutrition students coming and saying we want to do this. We need these skills, and in particular nutritionists out in the field coming back and saying, hey, I'm dealing with a whole bunch of stuff. Or the physios I've been talking to, they're in a small room alone with people. They hear a lot of stuff that they don't feel prepared to deal with, and they need some skills, whether that's psychology, but then there's behavior change in there as well. So there's psychology, there's potential for counseling, all this kind of thing.
Oh, Alyssa, that would be wonderful. Imagine if we could track 3-year psychology graduates. Oh, let's think about how we might.
Honey, you've got engineering students who switch over. Yeah, it's interesting. I do a lot of work in human robot interaction, and we've had a lot of trouble actually getting psychology graduates into that. I had trouble filling a PhD position because a scholarship position, just because they weren't aware of that as a potential avenue. But we work with engineering students all the time, and they need a lot of the skills, you know, that we're teaching, and they don't realize that.
Absolutely.
And they do use the word human to describe people a lot, though.
We can work on that. But I think it's really actually been helpful for me to see that your responses in the chat here as well, because I think I know for myself I could do a better job at promoting education as well, a Master of Education for teaching, because we, you know, think about how wonderful the attributes of a psychology degree would be for teaching, as we know, as tertiary educators. But I wonder if I haven't thinking aloud here, because I'm in a faculty of health. I think I often think of various other health avenues. So sometimes where we sit within the university, we know psychology can sit in social sciences or science and technology or within a faculty of health. And I think that's fantastic, actually, because it highlights that we really can do everything. But again, it does link us back to those not image challenge, but that conceptual challenge of what we are and what we do.
Natalie, psychology and computer science is what I did in undergrad, and it actually wasn't easy to keep going through that, and it should be, because it's a really obvious combination there. So are you responding to Tegan, or should I?
Just completely agree.
Just agree?
Just completely agree. And yeah, promoting
everything Tegan said.
Promoting those opportunities.
Yep.
And what's been really great is when we talk to students that have successfully gained employment during their tertiary degree, because of their work integrated learning experience. That's fantastic.
And one question I actually got from talking with students throughout this project that I didn't think of, that they came to me with, is they said, can this help us find jobs during our degree? So they don't want to be working as a barista during their degree. If they could be working in another job, that will be a stepping stone to their later degree. So I think having these conversations, even though we have to work with the outcome expectancies early on, meaning that, if we can line them up, and if they say, well, I want to work with this organization when I finish, or that's the kind of organization I want to work with, what other lower level jobs do they have that I can go in?
And that also,
Tanya's child safety is a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also largely led us to develop a partnership here with the Canberra Institute of Technology, a TAFE-based institution, where we do offer a Cert 4 in mental health for selected undergraduate psychology students. And that's been really successful the past few years in helping them to identify relevant employment in the mental health sector. particularly oriented to those students who aren't going to go on to postgraduate studies in psychology. But not only are they gaining relevant employment during their tertiary studies, we know from speaking to people that they're likely to accelerate more rapidly throughout the organisation once they've completed with their psychology degree. And we know there's huge shortages in the mental health sector as well. So it's kind of a win-win all round, in my opinion. But it's a lot of work, but it's good stuff.
But this conversation has made me realise that, you know, when we're talking to our colleagues, we've talked to them about ways of implementing this, but there are things we haven't talked about. Like we didn't talk about, hey, that this is a selling point. Talking to the first years about this kind of thing can help you find a job now. I don't think we've been explicit about that.
I think we can do better at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we keep going?
I think we should. So this is where we've got a bit of a shift now from the student perspective. Of course, we think first and foremost often of our students and of them as graduates, but thinking about it from the employer perspective. So again, how can we implement these findings as tertiary educators? But thinking about the widespread industry placement options for students, hopefully we might have even inspired you to look up some of these jobs and think about partnering with potentially different employers from what you already do for work integrated learning.
I thought you were going to say tempt them to look up other jobs, which is something we hear from psychology educators.
Well, that could
can I use this to find another job?
I mean, it's nice to know of our relevancy and that we've got options. And thinking about where they go currently, but we want to know where can they go. And this is where it gets potentially trickier, because not only are we thinking outside the box of where they can go, but we have to sell it to these workplace work integrated learning placement providers and potential employers. And this is where we've really found, and please let me know if your own experiences, there's a real discrepancy with what potential employers think a psychology graduate can do. They might think, oh, we'll put them in a counselling role or HR, and they can hit the ground running. And we know we don't teach necessarily, I mean, maybe you do, those micro skills at that level. But if we were to supplement that with something like the practical training at a TAFE-based level, then they're going to be highly competitive.
But then more broadly, it's thinking about all the things they can do and how we communicate those. How do we talk to the person that, you know, wants to employ a warehouse manager who wouldn't dream of employing a psych student, or the person that wants to employ a UX designer, and in their head they had a mental picture of who they were going to employ.
Absolutely.
And it was going to be someone with a computer science degree. How do we say, look, actually a psych graduate will be a great match if you actually look at the things that you.
And you know, this is where it gets trickier, I should say, because we are working to address even misconceptions around psychology within a university setting, and you might be finding that too. So we're working on a research showcase where we highlight the awesome research that we do that is not just about mental health, which is often the conception that we have when dealing with colleagues from other disciplines, and really promoting psychology as that science, which we're going to open up to the public and the like. Maybe I'm thinking aloud here, but a showcase for potential employers. You know, what can the psychology student do, and how can they help you?
Yeah. Does anyone else have any experience with this? Success stories with this? It depends a lot where you're located. I know.
Absolutely.
It can depend a lot on personal relationships, but at the moment we're leaning heavily on personal relationships and then gradually growing out and out. But is there anything else that we should be doing as a collective, do you think? Has this got everyone stumped? People were texting more about the authentic assessment.
But this is where it becomes more of a challenge, because we naturally go for current students and graduates, but it's much bigger than that.
More externally visible.
Oh, great question, Alyssa. Janie.
You're a skills and attributes person.
So I think Alyssa's referring to the annotation schema. Is that correct, Alyssa? Our annotation schema that we utilize? Yes.
So, I mean, the thing is, when they're applying for jobs, it's also that element, some of the ones that we didn't include, in that they still have to address communication a lot of the time. They still have to address some of the others. I think all of us and a lot of people I've been talking to have been trying to highlight the skills and attributes for graduates in general. You know, people have talked about their capstone units where you really try and articulate, what have I learned? How can I communicate that to an employer? So I think a lot of us are part way there. I think we don't do it as a discipline. I think that's not how we're seen. I assume a lot of disciplines have assumptions made about who they are and what they produce, and I think we just have that problem as well currently. I don't quite know how to make those skills and attributes more externally visible. I mean, I think a lot of them have them on our websites. We say, hey, psych graduates are great, they can do this, this, and this. As Tony was talking about, their book, you know, talks about those kinds of issues as well. But it's harder to reach individual employers.
And we also know there's going to be differences even across universities. We all obviously must meet the APAC foundational competencies and the skills and attributes must align with that. But it's also important to note those are minimum standards. And there are universities that might have specializations in particular areas. Yeah, agree, Sharon.
That is something I heard as I went around talking to people as well, really asking, is there more of a role for the APS in supporting 3-year graduates and talking about the skills and attributes that they have rather than the focus on the kind of psychology, the clinical pathway, and the other pathways that are now out there as well. So absolutely, that's something I heard over and over again. It's not something we have control of, but it's issues we can raise and keep talking about and trying to get in front of people.
And I think, right, let's
leave that for a bit.
Let's leave that for a moment. I'm conscious of our time.
Yep.
It's 7:08 now, but thank you for hanging in there with us this evening. We hope thus far it's been informative and helpful. But I want you to picture you're giving the talk to 150 plus people who have come along to the open day of your university. And then the hand comes up at the end when you've told everyone how wonderful your course is and you've given them the course quilt data and introduced the staff, and everyone's thinking, yeah, and everyone says, what job can I do after the 3 years? And what do you say? What do you say when someone asks you that? You're up there in front of 150 people and they're all waiting for you to give them an answer.
Someone I talked to said they panic.
Yeah, that's what we often heard as a pain point was, don't really know what I say. I need a
blurble something. Yeah.
Or again, that sort of general response around various industries. Does anyone else have anything different that they might say? Or would perhaps what we've covered tonight make you think differently about what you would say in future? Because I think we've all had that experience.
I've talked to one group that have already incorporated some of our materials into their open day. So I've already used the examples provided to help their open day this year. That was just from our talk at AusPlat. So that was great.
Yeah, nice to know. Yeah, I actually think we shouldn't apologize for the fact that psychology is so diverse, and we need to celebrate the breadth of opportunities that are available. The challenge we've had to date is that we couldn't provide that specificity of that breadth, and so the poor student and graduates were just sort of left to roam around and find it out themselves, and without necessarily the centralized support at the university level. Oh,
we
nice,
have,
Natalie.
It is nice.
That's impact. Love it.
One of our staff members who has a very broad view of psychology, perhaps even broader than we do, said when he comes to finding working grade learning placements, he assumes everything is relevant to psychology unless proven otherwise. So that's actually not a bad approach.
Absolutely. And Ahmed, you've highlighted even the challenge of finding placements at a postgraduate level. We know there can be a saturation, particularly in local markets, and with increasing, MPP courses and students trying to find their own placement opportunities on completion of that as well. So not only is there potential saturation there, but we've got to think a bit more broadly outside the box at that undergraduate level of where they can go, and to avoid that saturation. We shouldn't be approaching those same placement holders exclusively for these undergraduate opportunities.
Well, I just want to talk to Angela's point. That's great, Karina. I really want to hear how psychology is relevant to construction. But Angela, thanks. We need devil's advocacy in here. Absolutely. It seems promising that psych grads are able to find jobs in many other industries. There's still a limitation in what they can actually do. Absolutely. I think we did wonder that when we first found some of these. We thought, oh, can they really apply for these? Oftentimes they can, but yes, if the employers have an expectation about what they want done, and if they have a particular degree or terminology that they want, then yes, absolutely. They're going to have a hiring preference for what they already know. You know, our psychology skills know that, absolutely. So that has to be part of the conversation. So I think,
and it circles back to what we were talking about in the preceding slide around not just us, but collectively, how we can approach employers, potential employers, communicate what we know is wonderful about our degree and what the graduates can do, because we're dealing with misconceptions at that end. I mean, I think we could also say that a psychology graduate might have also majored in HR. They might have also done business. We've got to look at the diversity in skills and attributes and experience, pardon me.
And I think part of that is important. If at first year they think, well, actually, I do want to go into construction, then it makes sense for them to get a major in that, to get some kind of labeled skill, whether that be a Cert 4 in something, whether it be a postgrad, diploma, whether it be a full double degree. They do need to have ownership over their own pathway through this. And like you say, it is unlikely that they can walk into a job labeled completely differently without a good argument for doing so. So I think it needs to come from both directions. It needs to come from the students justifying their applicability, but we also need to change this understanding of what psychology grads can do.
And I also think it highlights the necessity of some of the things we've chatted about around the importance of an orientation unit, a capstone unit. So students aren't getting to the end and then trying to find, a degree. And we talk to colleagues, similar things in sort of sport and exercise, science areas, they'll encourage their students to make sure they get a first aid certificate. There's a particular Cert 4 course that they encourage students to do for coaching, just so that they're employable upon completion of that degree. So it's not saying, hey, here's the report, off you go. It's how can we use these findings, like you say, to make sure that we are that we are supporting students and prospective and graduates.
Yeah, these are some really good points. And I think getting around our undergrads being misled in the kind of skills they'll be gaining, absolutely. I think that's a real problem. We certainly have students coming in thinking they're going to come out with, in essence, a counselling degree.
Absolutely. I'm sure you all have that experience a little bit. Yep.
So we need to articulate that better. We need to understand when students should be doing a double or often ours do a double major in counselling, a major in counselling as part of that. So it is true. The course is lacking a relevant practical experience, some of them. So we need to think about what we offer in our degrees. I think there's a broader discussion here. I think different unis are diversifying a bit, even within APAC, about what they specialize in and what they offer, and perhaps talking to students about that.
Well, I see this really highlighting the relevance and maybe even the necessity of having that professional core embedded throughout our degree, in terms of being explicit with students right from first year. These are the skills and attributes that you acquire through a psychology degree. If you want to work in social work or in AOD or in counselling, you will need additional qualifications. Hey, we've got this Cert 4 in mental health opportunity as a partnership, or you need to go into it's about the more that we're chatting here this evening and reading your comments, it's making me feel even more passionate about things like that orientation unit, to not only orientate them to the discipline, but being really explicit about what they will and will not learn, so that they can do their career planning accordingly.
There's a lot of really good points in the chat. This is a really complicated discussion. I think there's also an element here, and to play devil's advocate for people who aren't here because they don't think it's important, there are plenty of staff that don't think it's their job. To say, well, no, I teach the unit, they take out of it what they want, they take their degree, and then it's not my problem anymore. So there is a conversation that needs to be had within within the discipline more broadly, And within the discussion around what is it your uni particularly offers, what are you valuing? Is that kind of internship experience important for you, or is that not the direction your uni's going in? Because that's, yeah.
And you know, it'll be interesting to see how foundational competencies might shift across time as well. And that sort of links back to Alyssa's point around, you know, job titles and things change and industries change. Well, it's not like the competencies that we have are stagnant forever.
Yeah. And Ross is
these are
talking
excellent
about how psych degree is best paired with some other training or experience.
Yeah.
I believe that absolutely that's true. And I know several educators I talked to on the way around, that's how they pitch it at open day. They have, when people say, what should I do, psych degree, they say, well, what else are you interested in? A psych degree major will make that better. Add it on top.
Exactly. And this is why, you know, we had really passionate discussions, I'd say, about the necessity of identifying those jobs that map to a psychology degree without that additional qualifications. Now, there was a lot of structural challenges within a machine learning environment, because I'm not a machine learning expert. I wanted to just apply that as a filter. Turns out not possible. But yeah, we want to be able to particularly support those 3-year graduates who don't have additional qualifications in terms of postgraduate training, know where they can go. And we're aware that some of the specific job titles, even as Janie noted though, they might imply that they can go off and be a social worker. No, but then there are some job titles that are listed as social worker that don't actually require a social work degree. So it's around that semantics as well. So there's a lot of challenges within it.
It's also the whole degree agnostic thing is getting bigger and bigger, and talking to employers, they are now saying more and more, I don't really care. I don't care what degree they've got. Can they do the job? And obviously that doesn't apply in some of the more applied settings, but there are a lot of jobs out there where I was really surprised at how much employers honestly don't care. Now, yes, they may have certain expectations, for instance, in policy that they'll have a politics degree or whatever that might be, but they were relatively open-minded about that. So I think that may have even changed since some of us were in the job market, or you know, originally went out there and looking.
I'm just thinking, you know, what we've given a lot of suggestions in terms of just a bit of a brainstorm that we did for, okay, how can we, or how have we been trying to implement and make changes based on this project? We hope that the lesson plans and the PowerPoints, etc., are of use to you. We're very open to feedback. But just thinking, like, what do you still need? And thinking, I know we could talk very at a broad structural level around, we need everyone at the university to understand what psychology does, blah, blah, blah. But thinking about you in your role, is there anything that you still need as an educator that would help you?
Yeah. So I think assessment examples or ideas kind of came through from some of our conversation.
Yeah.
I think this broader issue is a bit harder to pin down, but perhaps some materials for open days about that pairing of psych with other degrees, and that combining of psych, encouraging people to do meaningful work experience, jobs while they're doing their undergraduate degree, to give them that best chance. Tutorial activity ideas, absolutely. So that's some of the key things that I think are coming through. This has been really useful.
Let us know in the chat, or jump onto the microphone about, you know, not saying we can deal with everything.
That's a big issue, isn't it? Low SES students are less likely to.
I mean, I haven't read the full report, but I've read the summary. It was released just last Sunday, wasn't it? Like however many days ago.
Get onto it.
Yes, it's on my list. But I was actually really thrilled with a lot of the what I'm looking for.
Recommendations.
Thank you. Recommendations from the report, particularly for students from equity groups.
Yeah.
I'm going a little bit off topic here, but I do hold a lot of concerns for us with postgraduate psychology. I'm increasingly concerned with the loss of CSP places, and that we're not getting enough representation of practicing psychologists from various backgrounds, and I see that being compounded with the introduction of Master of Professional Psychology courses and full fee paying and the like. So what is great is being able to see that the importance in the accord of supporting students from low SES backgrounds. And
I can speak quite specifically as well, if you like.
Yeah,
because in work integrated learning, we actually have specific financial support that students can apply for when they go out on the work integrated learning placement. And we do it because we have a lot of low SES students at our university. You see it more in the health placements, so things like nursing and things like this. There's relatively high awareness there. I think we need to extend that.
Yeah, I look, and it is a real challenge. But I'm correct. You might have all read the report and know more than me, but my understanding is there is that recommendation or real push for financial assistance for students. But I think that's pretty much for that clinical placement level.
Yeah.
I don't know if that extends down to undergraduate industry placements. And I think that's a really important consideration when we're thinking, hey, is this going to be mandatory? Is this going to be an elective? Or how flexible can we be with these work integrated learning opportunities in terms of the time that you have to complete the 180 hours or whatever it is?
But absolutely, we risk providing additional opportunities and additional competitive edge to the people who least need it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a real concern.
In terms of what Janie and I were reflecting on that we particularly see a need for still from our perspective and thinking about the findings of this report, we want to produce more exemplar job descriptions that are, sort of the less typical jobs that you might think of. So we've got that on our list. And I think this links back to Isabel and Angela's point. How do you make yourself competitive when you're up against someone who might have a management degree for a management role, as an example, and guidance for how to apply for those? So this is where we really see the importance of all of us engaging with our careers areas, and we've certainly been doing that. And also, we also see the need to upskill our industry knowledge and potential placement providers. So that's sort of where we're headed to next.
Yeah.
But let us know if you see particular value or think, oh, Amanda, Jenny, don't waste your time with that.
And I think Sharon's also a slide ahead, asking for a coordinated approach.
And we thought, like, with 5 minutes to go, maybe we could just solve the issue of how we can support a shift in society of how the general public views a psychology degree. But I guess, we're it's been inferred throughout the evening. And we've got challenges within a university. How do we then go out, and then we've got to deal with the potential employers and placement providers. Yeah. But all of this, I actually feel really excited. I think we're at a bit of a crossroads. I don't know if you're there with me yet, or maybe you're past it.
Maybe you're an optimist.
Maybe I am dispositional optimist. That's fine. But I really do feel like there's a bit of a shift. Or is it just because I've coded all these jobs?
It could be. I think the other thing is I do a lot of interdisciplinary work, multidisciplinary work. And that's where I'm actually seeing our value. And it's interesting for my students, a PhD student of mine sitting in our robotics lab meeting and just looking around at some of the questions people are asking and realizing how much that student knows that hasn't been part of the training of the other students. Now, that's just because we've got different skills. That's not a negative, but it's a huge positive for them, and them realizing what they can contribute in a workplace environment. And so I'm seeing more in that. So I'm actually, unusually for me, I'm optimistic as well, because I think, there is that conversation. The big problems have to be solved in this interdisciplinary way. We need all these different people in the room. And I think Psych can actually take a leadership approach often at a time because of our understanding of a lot of these issues.
I mean, we sort of pose this as a, hey, let's solve everything. Let's solve everything for society here. But in all seriousness, we can and should be thinking about this. We thought this would probably warrant a separate roundtable, but even looking at your comments here, completely agree with that coordinated approach. It's not something we've got all the best intentions at the grassroots level, but it needs that infrastructure and strategy to be able to utilize that.
And I like that idea of being a coordinated approach, because I think at the moment there is a bit of an us or them. There's a feeling, oh, I didn't get into a postgrad degree, so therefore I'm different.
But we need to change that narrative. We
Yeah.
changed that narrative right from first year. And if you don't have an orientation unit, I think you should consider one. That's my drop mic moment. But if you or think about that first semester or first teaching period, first year unit, how can you make this explicit? And we've sort of changed even just some language around. We call it psychological science. You're doing a degree in psychological science. Rather than that perceived clinical focus in the preparation for postgraduate training.
Yeah, I feel like we may have kind of bashed their ears for a while now. So
well, I get a bit passionate about some of these thoughts, solving it all.
We are absolutely. So we're just going to put a link into the report. There is going to be a link available. Thank you, Tony, to this presentation. Alyssa, that's a great little comment there as well. At that link, we'll also put, so at this link up here, which is on the University of Canberra website, we have the report. We also have those copies of the orientation, the slides and tutorial activities for orientation unit and capstone unit, but which of course can be used wherever in the degree suits. We're going to add this recording. Thanks very much, Tony. He's going to send that through as well. We would really be keen to hear from you as well. So if hopefully go away and talk about this in your groups, in your different universities. But if you had any feedback for us, ideas, we'd love to hear them, because we mean this to be the start.
Absolutely.
It's not what we
So
can do.
on that note, can I thank you for the work that the two of you have done? I know it's been a fantastic piece of work. We see the end, but for those of us who have seen where you've come from to now, it's just been fantastic. And the fact that you're willing to give away what it is that you're doing with the lesson plans, asking for other, what else do you need to help us all? I think that's phenomenal. So I just thank the two of you very much for that. And thank you for what you have done tonight. You can see in the chat that there are a number of links as well, including a link where you will find the recording if you want to go and have a look at the recording a bit later on. We've also got a link there for you to fill out just a very quick survey about tonight. So that helps us as well to understand what's going on. And I'm sure Janie and Amanda can understand how much we appreciate what they have given to us tonight. If they don't, they should.
Well, we appreciate the invite.
Absolutely.
And well done for speaking to Hotspur. I think, again, these are just all little steps, and thank you to Karina as well. These are all little steps that we need, right? Because as I said in the chat earlier, psychology degree doesn't equal psychologist, and we need to make sure that our students and educators and other external stakeholders understand the value of what it is that we've got here. So thank you to the two of you. Thank you everyone for turning up tonight. I know it's a big ask on a work day to come. I know I had to leave early so I could have some dinner. I hope none of you are starving to death. But otherwise, keep tuned into our Facebook site, to the Ausplat site, where we'll talk about what we're doing at the next roundtable, which is about the undergrad psychology competences as well, and the international project that's been happening around that. So we'd love to see you back in probably another couple of months, but thank you all for coming tonight. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Appreciate the input, everyone.
Very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Oh, thank God.
You just need to stop the recording.
Yeah.